Thank you, Mr Speaker. Residents across my constituency of Sutton and Cheam, particularly the SM1, SM2 and SM3 postcodes, have been reporting issues with their deliveries for years. Local social media is full of people reporting one-day-a-week deliveries, asking which other roads this is occurring on. I visited my delivery office for the last 2 Christmases, meeting hard-working posties who've just been let down by the system. I'd like to particularly shout out to Timmy, who's been delivering my road for decades and is approaching retirement, so congratulations to him. Can the Minister please add Sutton to the list of his agenda this afternoon, and also report back next Wednesday to the Westminster Hall debate, which I imagine he'll be coming to, with clear actions from his meeting this afternoon?
Well, I'll also pay tribute to Timmy and thank him for his years of service. It's exactly because it's a service full of people like him who are passionate about their job that we need to ensure that Royal Mail has the reforms and the improvements in quality of service.
Wife's jury service letter arrived too late for her to defer. Colin from Britain had a hospital letter arrive 3 days after the appointment, and Michael from Rugeley waited weeks for a new debit card. These were first-class letters, so planned reforms to the universal service obligation wouldn't have made much of a difference. Will the Minister impress on the leadership of Royal Mail the human impact of these delays on posties and residents?
Minister.
Well, he makes a powerful case for how delays and failings in Royal Mail standards impact on so many different aspects of his constituents' lives. And I'll certainly use those examples when I next meet with Royal Mail.
Jim Shannon, briefly.
Thank you. Minister, I want to make a quick point about hospital appointments. When you miss your hospital appointment, you go to the back of the queue. You start again. You might wait another 2 years. So whenever the Minister has his meeting with Royal Mail today, can I ask him to convey to Royal Mail to have meetings with them and the Health Trust and the patient groups as well, and the Northern Ireland representative, to ensure that those who miss appointments due to delays in the Royal Mail will not be disadvantaged, because quite clearly they are at this moment.
Well, he makes a really important point. As I mentioned a moment ago, we are working with the Health Department here to make sure that as many as possible health bodies take advantage of that barcode service that's available to make sure that they get through. And I'll certainly make sure that the issues that he discussed are raised in Northern Ireland.
Alex Mayer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Lots of letters are late. One that stood out to me, a constituent raised, was about a parking fine, that by the time it had arrived had almost doubled in price. The Royal Mail locally tell me that they're recruiting 12 new postal workers, but if that doesn't fix it, what should we try next?
Minister.
Continue to speak to me. She grabbed me at the votes the other night about local Royal Mail issues, and I know she'll continue to do so.
Steve Race.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Many of my residents and fantastic posters in Exeter have raised exactly the same concerns as other people in the House today. Can the Minister give an assessment of how he thinks Ofcom has dealt with this so far, and does he have confidence in Ofcom to get a grip on this issue?
Minister.
Well, we rely on Ofcom as the regulator of Royal Mail, and that's exactly why we're having this meeting later today to discuss what more they can do to deal with the very obviously widespread concerns that exist across the House about quality of service.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. It's clear that the NHS barcode prioritisation system broke down, but the problems are not limited to NHS letters. I want to highlight the Government's Tell Us Once service following a bereavement. Many honourable members will know the urgency and distressing nature of that correspondence. So will the Minister, who has been extremely active dealing with constituency concerns, look at this issue of prioritisation of non-NHS letters?
Minister.
Yep. In a previous life, I was very proud to have worked on at the inception of the Tell Us Once service, and I know how important it is to people in the worst possible time of their life, and I'll certainly raise the issue he discusses.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As the Labour Member of Parliament for Bournemouth East, I stand by my postie here in the House of Commons, and I thank them for their dedication and their diligence, something that stands in sharp contrast to the management of the Royal Mail. The trial underway has failed. The new approach will spectacularly fail if put into effect. Will the Minister, when he meets later with Ofcom and again with the Royal Mail, say that he will not stand for the Royal Mail becoming yet another gig economy parcel courier that exploits its employees and lets down customers?
Well, this is a government that is improving the working conditions and standards and rights of workers across the economy. He makes a really important point that there is wisdom, there is experience within the workforce, and it's about these talks that are going on at the moment are about bringing that together with the ambition and the responsibilities of the management, and that's why we're taking the actions we are.
David Burton-Saxon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Southend Sorting Office was part of the original pilot for these changes to the USO. It failed, and what is clear 9 months later is it is still failing. So I've today summoned management to meet with me and my constituents to hear firsthand the challenges this is causing. Will he meet with me following that meeting to hear that feedback and take it right up the chain?
Yes. Certainly, Mr. Speaker, I will, and I thank not just him for raising that, but all the honourable members have brought to me, if you like, local intelligence, which informs my own understanding of the issues across the Postal Service.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Residents in Ardsley, Robin Hood, Lofthouse, parts of Tingley and Morley are all complaining that they've been waiting up to 3 weeks for postal service. It's obviously not the posties' fault, it's a question of leadership and management. Will he meet with me following his meeting with Ofcom to see the evidence for himself? And what can he say to reassure my constituents now?
I'd reassure his constituents that we are expressing the frustration and the anger that he has expressed to me directly, to Royal Mail and through Ofcom. And of course I'll happily discuss developments with him.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I agree with my residents across Wolverhampton and Willenhall that Royal Mail's delivery services are just not good enough. But we stand with our frontline postal workers who are working incredibly hard and bearing the brunt. So I call the Minister to challenge Royal Mail's leadership and have a look at the two-tier employment model and wider issues that are affecting recruitment and retention of our hard-working staff.
Yep, our constituents absolutely deserve better, and posties deserve dignity at work, given the essential job that they do for our society and our economy. That's exactly why we are convening those meetings between management and unions to make sure that those talks progress.
Final question, Dave Robertson.
My speaking notes talk about excuses from Royal Mail, and now I'm here, I don't think that's actually the language I want to use, because people across Lichfield, Burntwood and the villages are sick of being lied to by Royal Mail. I met Royal Mail just before Christmas to complain to them about the total lack of a postal service that we had in Lichfield. We were probably the worst area in the country at that point. I was told when I had that meeting that all of the first-class mail went out last week. That is a lie. It is an absolute lie, because my constituents told me. Now, Royal Mail clearly don't have a handle on this. They are either not measuring their performance or they are covering up their performance. So I would ask the Minister to use that golden chair that we have to force Royal Mail to be honest, fess up and fix it.
Well, the passion and the anger that he's shown just now, he's shown in private to me as well in raising these issues. And again, I think it speaks about how frustrating it is as members of Parliament in any issue to raise a problem and then be told that it doesn't exist when your constituents are telling you that. And Royal Mail have a responsibility absolutely to address that in a direct and straightforward manner, because if we aren't recognising the problem, we'll not deal with it.
Can I just say I think it's an excellent debate, and thank you for the way that it's been delivered on behalf of all our constituents. Royal Mail's management's got a problem, and they've certainly been highlighted today. So thank you, everybody. We'll let the front bench change over. Sorry. Right, we now come to the next statement. Home Secretary.
Thank you. With your permission, Mr. Speaker, I will make a statement on public order. The Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, Sir Mark Rowley, has requested a prohibition on processions relating to Al-Quds Day under Section 13 of the Public Order Act. Madam Deputy Speaker, I have consented to that request, placing a ban on these processions for both protesters and counter-protesters that will now last for a month. This is the first ban since 2012, and so I wish to explain why I have done so to the House today. It is important that we start with the context. Initiated by Iran's then leader, Ayatollah Khomeini, in 1979, Al-Quds Day is an event held on the last Friday of Ramadan. The day is marked worldwide by rallies and demonstrations in support of Palestine, including here in Britain. Plans for a procession this Sunday in London have been led by the Islamic Human Rights Commission, an organisation that has been closely associated with the Iranian regime. Of course, this year's event interacts with the ongoing conflict in the Middle East. It comes at a time when the Iranian regime is attacking British forces and bases, as well as those of our allies. It also comes just days after the arrest of 4 individuals as part of an investigation led by counter-terror police. They were arrested under the National Security Act for allegedly spying on Jewish communities on behalf of the Iranian regime. This context creates clear challenges for the police. Heightened attention and therefore larger expected attendance, heightened tensions between protesters and counter-protesters, and therefore greater potential for conflict. The expertise regarding if and how this can be safely managed rightly sits with the police, and the legal test is clear. Any request to prohibit a procession must only be lodged with the aim of preventing serious public disorder that could not otherwise be prevented by imposing other conditions on a public procession under Section 12 of the Public Order Act. Section 12 conditions typically include specifying the route, location and times of a protest. Under normal circumstances, they are sufficient to ensure protests remain peaceful and the public are kept safe. However, the Commissioner has clearly stated that the Metropolitan Police's view is that serious public disorder cannot be avoided unless a prohibition under Section 13 is introduced. This assessment is grounded in the tensions created by international conflict, the scale of the expected march, and the presence of protesters and multiple counter-protesting groups, all seeking to march at once. My first duty is to keep the public safe. Having carefully and thoroughly considered the risk assessment presented to me by the Metropolitan Police, I am satisfied that an order under Section 13 is necessary. For 1 month, there will therefore be a prohibition on processions in London related to Al-Quds Day by protesters and counter-protesters, which will come into effect today and will end on the 11th of April. Should the Commissioner consider a further extension is required, he will be able to make a further submission at that time. I must be clear about what this prohibition does not do. The Police and Home Secretary only have the power to prohibit a public procession. Section 13 cannot be used to ban a static protest, referred to in the legislation as a public assembly. Should a static demonstration proceed this weekend, the police will not be able to stop it. Instead, they will be able to impose conditions, such as dictating the precise location and timing. People will therefore be able to exercise their right to peaceful protest, though the full force of the law will be enforced if hate crimes or other crimes are committed. Today's announcement is confined to specific circumstances, but I know this will excite scrutiny around the wider issue of policing protests. The House will be aware that I have appointed Lord MacDonald of Riverglaven to carry out an independent review of public order and hate crime legislation. His review is ongoing, and I will update this House on its findings at the soonest possible moment. I would, however, like to make a wider point about the right to protest in this country. What I have announced today is narrowly focused on specific circumstances in a unique moment, but it does not alter an enduring fact. In this country, we rightly pride ourselves on our freedoms, including the right to peaceful protest. It is a precious right and one that I revere, and it sets us apart from autocracies of all kinds across the world. This prohibition is therefore limited and specific. It bans marches, but not static demonstrations in relation to Al-Quds Day. Equally, I must add, there is no prohibition on protesting against the plight of Palestinians, and there never will be. Hundreds of protests have already taken place across the country this year in solidarity with Palestinians, and the Met alone have policed 32. Peaceful and lawful protest, whether for Palestine or for Israel or for any other cause, must be cherished and protected, and this government will always defend that sacred freedom. At the same time, as Home Secretary, I have a solemn duty, and it is my first duty, to keep the British people safe. I have been presented with the assessment of the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police that he cannot guarantee the security of our capital and prevent serious public disorder without a prohibition on processions relating to Al-Quds Day. Having reviewed his assessment, it is clear to me that my duty to the public and their safety dictates that I must accept his request. It is right that we prohibit these processions while continuing to uphold our ancient commitments to the freedoms that we are rightly proud of. And that is the balance, Madam Deputy Speaker, that I have sought to strike today, and I commend this statement to the House.
I call the Shadow Home Secretary, Chris Phil.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, I fully support banning this march. The police assessment of the risk is right, and in fact I wrote to the Commissioner a week ago urging exactly this ban. But the problems with the Al-Quds March go beyond simply the risk of serious disorder. In 2010, 10 people were arrested for assault of an emergency worker, inciting racial hatred and public order offences. Chants at Al-Quds marches in the past have called for intifada and revolution. Calling for intifada and revolution are calls for violence, and calls for violence have no place on our streets. A leading speaker at these marches has been Nazim Ali, a man who has demanded that Israel, quotes, be wiped off the map. Speaking at a previous march, Ali even blamed what he called Zionists for the Grenfell fire. He also said, and I quote, "We are fed up of Zionists, their rabbis and their synagogues." This reference to rabbis and synagogues shows that when this despicable man says Zionist, he means Jews. This is clear anti-Semitism. So speech inciting violence and speech inciting anti-Semitism, which we have heard at these marches in the past, has serious consequences. Anti-Semitism is now rampant. Jews are 10 times more likely to be victims of hate crimes than Muslims. We saw an Islamist-motivated murder at a synagogue in Manchester just a few months ago. In the past 25 years, 94% of all terror murders in the UK have been committed by Islamist terrorists, who also make up 75% of counter-terrorism caseloads. So does the Home Secretary share my concern that the Prevent caseload is only 10% Islamist in nature? And if she does share my concern, what does she propose to do about that? The organiser of the Al-Quds March is the so-called Islamic Human Rights Commission, which, as the Home Secretary quite rightly acknowledged, is in essence a front organisation for the Iranian regime. Now, former Iranian Deputy Minister of Culture, Ali Aksar Ramazanpour, has said that there is a network of Islamic charities in the UK which are, in his words, not autonomous, but are in fact funded and controlled by the regime in Tehran. Does the Home Secretary share my concern about that, and what does she propose to do about it? Of course, in opposition, the Labour Party also, I think rightly, pledged to proscribe the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. Will she update the House on the implementation of that pledge? I'm also deeply concerned about many events that have been recently held, particularly at universities, lamenting the demise of Ayatollah Khamenei, a man who in the last few weeks was directly responsible for the murder of 30,000 of his own people, a man who supported and sponsored terrorism around the world, including backing Hamas and the atrocities on October the 7th, and who backed various regional wars. Will the Home Secretary join me in condemning those who mourned his demise and celebrated his evil acts? More broadly, Madam Deputy Speaker, and finally, the Al-Quds marches are a troubling symptom of a growing division in our society, where some people define themselves primarily by their religion or their ethnic heritage, and we've seen that spilling over into the conduct of elections. This is deeply troubling and deeply divisive. It undermines the very foundations of our nation, which depend on a shared identity and shared values. I'd be interested in the Home Secretary's views on that, and I hope the House returns to that topic. Let me finish with a broader point. Extremism has no place in the UK. Support for terrorism or violence has no place in the UK. Religious and racial hatred, including anti-Semitism, have no place here. So when someone who is not a British citizen expresses extremist, violent, pro-terror or racist views, In my view, they should have their visa revoked and be expelled, as set out in Section 3 of the Immigration Act 1971. The Home Office's own guidance makes clear, and I quote, that support for extremism or other unacceptable behaviour meets that statutory test. So will the Home Secretary use those powers to expel extremists who are not British citizens?
Home Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Shadow Home Secretary for his comments and his questions. Let me just say to him, firstly, he began his remarks by talking about some of the unacceptable acts of violence and incitement to violence that have taken place at various marches, not just relating to Al-Quds Day, but it is not unusual for multiple arrests to be made at all the different types of protest marches that take place. I hope he will join me in supporting the police as they ensure that the full force of the law is applied at all times, in all circumstances. And of course, I have recognised that there are some complexities in the legal framework and an inconsistency of application, and that is why I've asked Lord Ken MacDonald to do his review so that we do have much more consistency of practice across the UK and clarity for the police about what they can and cannot do when it comes to some of the things that are said when protests take place. And I hope that we can continue to work together across this House on those matters. He asks a specific question in relation to PREVENT. Let me tell him that, of course, I keep under review the way in which the PREVENT programme is functioning. There have been a number of recommendations made, multiple recommendations over many years, with many reports into the functioning of PREVENT, and it is important that PREVENT referrals are made in line with the statutory requirements and with the guidance, and that they are picking up those that we want to take away from a mindset and an ideology that could ultimately result in harm. So, I don't think it's appropriate for us to set percentage requirements of what should happen in terms of referrals, but it is absolutely important that the right referrals are being made, and we always work with partners who deliver the PREVENT programme and with local authorities and others in making sure that that is done properly. Let me say to him on the Islamic Human Rights Commission that the trust that is responsible for that charity is currently subject to a statutory inquiry by the Charity Commission, so I think it's important that that work is allowed to continue, and of course once they have reached a determination, I'm sure that that will be something that will be discussed in the House in the future. On the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, he will know, we have said this before, we've had this discussion many times at this dispatch box, and in fact the answers aren't all that different from when these positions were reversed between our parties. We do not comment on matters relating to proscription, but this government has accepted the recommendations made by Jonathan Hall, Casey, and we will be taking forward that work at the earliest available opportunity. Look, in relation to those who are mourning publicly the death of Khomeini, the deceased leader, supreme leader of Iran, this is where free speech really butts up against what conduct most of us would consider appropriate. Let me say to him, I do not, of course, mourn the passing of Ayatollah Khomeini. It is for others to decide what they do and do not support. What I'm absolutely clear on is whatever methods people use to express their political views, they must do so in line with the law of this land, and that law should be always enforced without fear or favour. And I will always support the police in making sure that that is the case. And then separately, he also asks about how we work as a society. I think his questions are about what the responsibilities are of citizens in this country. I don't think it's for a government to dictate to its citizens what political views they're allowed to hold or how they should express themselves or their identity, whether that is religious or ethnic or something else in nature. It is the job of government to make sure that we have a set of rules and a set of values that are equally applied, our respect for democracy, our respect for the rule of law, and all of the norms by which our society operates. That does mean that we do accept free speech and people's ability to have views that might be offensive, that many of us might disagree with, but they are still allowed to express those views. And I wouldn't want to see anything that happens in relation to these very troubling events to then clamp down on those freedoms that we hold so precious. It is always a judgment and it's always a balance that has to be struck, and it's important that the government always tries to strike that balance in the right way. And then on his final point, this government has already taken action, and I will always use my full powers under the law to make sure that those who would cause harm in our country with their extremist views are not allowed to enter our country, and I won't hesitate to use my powers under any of the Immigration Acts to exclude people from this country who have no right to be here.
Mark Stewart. Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Secretary of State's decision to ban this weekend's Al-Quds March. Al-Quds was founded by the Ayatollah 40 years ago. It has repeatedly featured support for the Iranian regime, terrorist groups, and often promotes dangerous anti-Semitism too. Given the growing threat to Jewish communities across the UK, will the Home Secretary now move to prescribe the IRGC, consider sanctions on regime-linked assets, and outline what further steps have been taken to protect the Jewish community?
Home Secretary.
Thank you. Well, my honourable friend will know that the IRGC are sanctioned in their entirety already. And as I say, we don't comment on matters relating to proscription, but we have accepted the recommendations made by Jonathan Hawke AC, and the government will take those forward at the earliest available opportunity.
Democrat spokesperson Max Wilkinson.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Home Secretary is aware that we have concerns about her authoritarian tendencies. We have particular concerns about this government's enthusiasm for restricting the right to protest and its use of terrorism legislation, wait for it, to prescribe protest groups. Liberal Democrats place a much stronger weight on the right to peaceful protest than the Home Secretary does. That is her right. It is a fundamental freedom, and any decision to ban a march must only be made in exceptional circumstances. However, on this occasion, it is right to take a cautious approach. The Islamic Human Rights Commission has very concerning views on Iran. The organisers have expressed support for the late Ayatollah Ali Khamenei and have claimed that he stood on the right side of history. Clearly, these values are at odds with the British public, who would rightly condemn the Ayatollah's oppression of the Iranian people and sponsorship of terrorism across the world. At a time when Iran is putting the safety of British citizens in the Middle East at risk with its indiscriminate attacks, it would be inappropriate for this march to go ahead. Nevertheless, the decision to ban this march highlights a deeper failure by the government to tackle the underlying threats that fuel such tensions. Labour has dithered and delayed over the prescription of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the organisation responsible for much of the violence and terror emanating from Iran and for attacks abroad. It is utterly ridiculous that the Home Secretary has already sunk almost £1 million of taxpayers' money in fighting in court to keep Palestine action prescribed, whilst dragging heels on the IRGC's prescription, even when the independent review of terrorism legislation has urged immediate prescription. So will the Home Secretary today commit to confronting the threat of the Iranian regime by immediately prescribing the IRGC? And if not, will she give the House a date for legislation?
I have to say, the opening remarks were rather disappointing. Let me just remind him of what I have actually said and done in relation to the right to protest. One is allowing the cumulative impact on communities that are affected by protests to be one of the reasons why police place additional conditionality on both a procession as well as a public assembly under Section 12 and 14 of the Public Order Act. I'm very disappointed that the Lib Dem spokesperson thinks that's an authoritarian tendency, when actually what we're doing is responding to repeat protests, creating real tension in our communities. And we are creating the conditions in which those protests can continue to go ahead, but with additional conditions as to their location and their time, and making sure that that framework is very clear for the police. That is actually an argument for allowing those protests to happen, but not in a way that also creates real fear amongst minority communities in this country. I'm very disappointed to see that the Lib Dems have set their face against that and would characterise that as authoritarianism. They are wholly wrong. These are the necessary steps to protect our vital freedoms and also our minority communities as well. The law in this area always requires a balance, and this government is seeking to strike that balance in exactly the right way. And the only other remarks I made in relation to protests were immediately after the terrorist attack at Heaton Park Synagogue in Manchester, when I suggested that marching the very next day in support of the Palestinian cause is perhaps not something that is British, because we should show some compassion to those who are suffering. Those are the only two acts, and he set his face against both of them in the opening remarks that he made. Let me just, I've already addressed the point in relation to the IRGC. They are, of course, sanctioned in their entirety. We will take forward the recommendations made by Jonathan Hawcasey. He knows that requires legislative change. We must act at speed, but also with care, and this government will do so. I think it's important that we don't conflate different issues. They are all, lots of these issues are causing tensions across the country, but the situation in relation to Palestine Action Group is different to the matters that we are discussing today. And I would suggest that, members of other parties should not seek to conflate those to score political points. I'll leave my remarks there. Thank you, Madam Deputy.
Rachel Blake. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I represent the area affected by this intervention, and I welcome the Home Secretary's intervention on public order policing today. I listened really carefully to the statement. She made clear that this prohibition is specific and discreet and focused. And what I heard was a real balancing of the challenges that she faces every day and that public order policing in London face every single day. The centre of London is home to dozens of synagogues and mosques and prayer rooms, and it's really important that I take that responsibility seriously of making sure that everybody is safe. I've been in regular contact with my constituents over the last week on this very topic. Will the Home Secretary work with me to articulate really clearly the rules and legislation in place to address these very challenging issues that we're all facing?
I thank my honourable friend for her remarks and her question, and also for the work that she has done on this issue, which I know has affected the people that she represents. Important to note, as she rightly does, that this is a very specific and discreet request from the Met Police, who of course have huge experience in dealing with multiple protests on multiple occasions and who have good policing experience. I take seriously the fact that this is the first time in many, many years that they have sought such an order, and they have done so given the unique circumstances posed by the planned marches in a few days' time, and in particular the threat of both protests and multiple counter-protests all moving through London at the same time. That does represent a very unique policing challenge, but I do pay tribute to the Met Police for the work that they have been doing to ensure that our freedoms in this country are protected. She will know that we've already commissioned Lord MacDonald to look at the legislation in this area and to make recommendations for clarifying the legal framework, and I look forward to working with her on all of that work once his review is in.
Greg Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Home Secretary's decision on this, but as my right honourable friend, the Shadow Home Secretary, made clear, this speaks to a much wider problem. So can the Home Secretary say what steps she's taking to ensure the United Kingdom cannot be used as a safe haven for the wealth, influence networks or political activity of senior figures connected to the Iranian regime, with specific regard to recent reports that the new so-called supreme leader of that Iranian regime is linked to a network of high-value London properties acquired through associates or shell companies, and what steps she will take to close down any loopholes or strengthen those sanctions?
Home Secretary.
Well, I thank the honourable member for his question. We are obviously looking very carefully at the allegations that have been made, and we would expect, of course, that the police and our security services respond appropriately. We will always work closely with them to ensure that we do so. Look, he raises a broader point, I think, in relation to the state threat that has been represented by Iran, which I know has been discussed in this House on many occasions before, and he will know of the public comments made by Sir Ken McCallum, the Director General of MI5 and others. Let me just assure him this government takes all levels of state threat very seriously, work very closely with our security agencies to make sure that we're always taking the necessary steps to keep our country safe.
David Pinto-Dyczynski.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Al-Quds March, glorifying a despicable blood-soaked regime, has long been a cause of great concern for my constituents in Hendon. That's why I wrote to the Commissioner of the Met asking for the march to be banned, and that's why I want to thank the Home Secretary for her resolute action today. But the threat posed by the Iranian regime to our Jewish community has not ended. Following the arrest of 4 men allegedly spying on our Jewish community on behalf of the Iranian regime, what steps are being taken to keep our Jewish community safe?
Home Secretary.
Well, I thank my honourable friend, and he will know there's a live police investigation that is taking place, so I cannot comment or give any additional details to this House until the criminal justice process is complete. But let me assure him we work very closely with our colleagues in counter-terror policing and in our security services to monitor the threats that are posed to individuals and organisations in our country and take all appropriate measures to keep our people safe.
Simon Hall.
Speaker, the Home Secretary may know that I, along with colleagues on this side of the House, signed at least 2 letters to the Prime Minister in recent months calling for the recognition of the state of Palestine. But I also support the decision that the Home Secretary has taken today. She has demonstrated, I think, the seriousness of purpose that she's taken on a very important decision, but one which clearly commands, I think, huge national support. One can be in favour of the decision that she has taken, and also in favour of the rights of the Palestinian people. The two are not alien of each other. She mentioned the static protest that could take place in lieu of a march. Is she able to tell the House, does she or the Metropolitan Commissioner have the power to time limit that specific event in order to ensure that ordinary people going about their business are not disrupted and that huge blockages do not take place in the capital in lieu of a moving march?
Home Secretary.
I thank the honourable member for the points that he has made. He's absolutely right. Let me just agree with him for the first part of his remarks on the rights of people in this country to support the Palestinian people, their right to self-determination and their desire for an end to conflict and recognition of their own state. There is no decision that this government has taken that prevents anyone from being able to express those political views and to take part in peaceful protest to draw attention to that cause, and that can all still absolutely continue. He's right on the static protest, so there are powers under the Public Order Act for the police to place conditions upon static protest. They can relate to both time, location, as well as other measures. Those will be operational decisions for the Met Police to make in the coming days.
Luke Taylor.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I thank the Home Secretary for this action? It's proportionate, and she seems to be taking lessons from the Liberal Democrats on that. Can I reiterate the calls from the Liberal Democrats to prescribe Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps and encourage her to come forward with timetable for that legislation to be delivered. But can I also ask what steps have been taken to ensure effective policing of the static protests that will go ahead on Sunday to protect Londoners and our police from potential clashes?
Secretary.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the House will be pleased to know I will decline the invitation to learn any lessons from the Liberal Democrats, not just on this occasion but forevermore. Look, let me reiterate the point in relation to the IRGC. We will bring forward measures as soon as we can. We obviously have to proceed with care because these are complex matters and we have to get the balance right in terms of the action that we take, but we have accepted the recommendations that have been made by Jonathan Hall-Casey, and the government is working at pace to make sure we move forward with delivery. And in terms of the conditions that might be placed upon a static protest that may or may not take place, those are operational matters for the Met Police. But, you know, I and the whole House should have every confidence in our police, not just in London but across the country, because police forces have been dealing with a huge increase in the number of protests, the variety of protests, the multiplicity of counter-protests that take place. And I think it is, we should pay tribute to the work of our hard-working police officers day in, day out, who manage to keep our country safe whilst allowing respect for our fundamental freedoms as well.
Father of the House.
I agree with everything the Home Secretary said today, especially as she's one of the best Conservative Home Secretaries we've ever had. But will she forgive me in asking her to stress this one part of her statement? I've noticed there's an increasing tendency to say that we should ban marches because we find the views of the marchers thoroughly offensive. Frankly, most of the marches in London I find fairly offensive because most of them are left-wing. But I would defend to the death the right of them to march. So can she emphasise this is a very high bar and you will only be banned if you incite violence or you might cause violence?
Well, again, sorry to disappoint the honourable gentleman, the father of the House, but I am Labour all day long. And I do enjoy swatting Conservatives, Lib Dems and Greens and everybody else at my leisure, and I will continue to do so. He is right on the law. It is a high bar for any banning order to either be requested or granted under the framework set out in the Public Order Act. It should be a high bar. He's absolutely right. People are allowed to have their own views, and we should not be seeking to shut down views that, whilst they might be offensive or provocative, are still within the law. And it is important that we always ensure that it's the law that is being followed, and any attempts to interfere with freedom of either expression or assembly should always meet a high bar. I am very satisfied that in the specific and unique circumstances set out for the public procession that had been planned, that test has been met. But of course the other protests can and should go ahead, and the full force of the law will always be applied.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. What consideration did the Home Secretary give to the compliance with sections 10 and 11 of the European Convention on Human Rights on the right to protest? And what discussions did the Metropolitan Police have with the organisers of this planned march to ensure that it could go ahead safely and would be properly stewarded and properly run? Because in my experience, the police are very accommodating and keen to have very long discussions with march organisers in order to make sure that the right to protest is maintained in our society. Because there is a slippery slope here. You ban a march that is not necessarily a very popular march, and that then leads on to draconian banning orders on all kinds of protests within our society.
Yeah. Well, I thank the honourable gentleman. Firstly, let me say to him on the European Convention on Human Rights, he's right on Articles 9, 10 and 11. Those are the relevant articles to the matters that we are discussing today, but they are qualified rights, and they have always been qualified rather than absolute rights, which means that the state can limit those rights in specific circumstances as long as legal tests of proportionality and so on are maintained. And I'm confident that the legal arrangements that we have in this country, that the terms set out in the Public Order Act, are obviously fully in compliance with our convention obligations, and that there is a very high bar for the powers that exist under Section 13 of the Public Order Act. I am satisfied on this occasion that that high bar has been met. And let me say to him, look, the Met Police have been policing this procession for many years. It is an annual event. They've policed it even when there has been huge opposition to it going forward. They faced a lot of pressure over many years in order to seek a ban, and they have never done so. And I'm very, very confident that as they have assessed the risk posed by this particular procession in the current context that we are in, and particularly given the range and the number of counter-protesting marches that are planned for the same day, that that does present a unique challenge for policing to be able to manage 5 different marches at the same time in the same bit of London. I think that they've made a very fair point, they made a strong case, and I have agreed with it on this occasion.
Dr. Andrew Morrison.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I very much welcome the statement, and I do commend the Home Secretary's judgment on this occasion. Now, plainly, the Islamic Human Rights Commission will seek to exploit the loophole that's offered up under Section 13, and that will be around the ability to protest in a static way. Has a location yet been identified for where that static protest will be likely to be? And would she agree with me that it should be away from where it's going to discommode the general public, and in a place that is not going to place undue burdens on our policing resources, which are finite?
Well, let me say to the honourable gentleman, any conditions that may or may not be placed on a static protest will be matters for the police. Those are operational matters. They have the powers available to them. I'm sure they will make use of those powers in the way that they have been doing with protests that have been taking place across the capital for some time now. And they would, of course, take into account many of the factors that he has raised in his question to me. Let me just caution a little on the description of the different difference between a static process and a moving procession, a public assembly, is it's not a loophole. That the law deliberately treats the two things differently, because the policing challenges of a static protest are different in nature from the policing challenge of policing a march which is moving from one location to another. And the Public Order Act just recognises the difference between those two things. But the police do have the powers to condition the way that a static protest takes place. They've made use of those conditions very well, in my opinion, to date, and I'm sure they will continue to do so.
Paul Kohler.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Notwithstanding my liberal instincts, I too agree with the Home Secretary's decision to prohibit this march, given Iran's targeting of UK nationals abroad and our allies overseas. But that targeting also occurs here in the UK, as occurred in my constituency of Wimbledon with the stabbing of an Iranian dissident journalist 2 years ago. So can the Home Secretary tell the House what specific steps she's taking to protect Iranian dissidents here in the UK who might be targeted by the Iranian state?
Home Secretary.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm going to bank the fact that he said he agrees with my instincts on this one. Perhaps I'm not so authoritarian after all. Let me say to him, he raised a more serious point. He raised a more serious point on dissidents, and we know the threat posed by dissidents from the Iranian regime here on UK soil, and he's rightly noted an earlier case. Let me assure him we work very closely with counter-terror policing and with our security services on monitoring the threats posed to all individuals in the UK by foreign states, and we're always ready to take any appropriate action, and indeed the police and the security services take action every day.
Sir Gavin Williamson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and very much welcome the Home Secretary's decision. Iran has a track record of hostile activity in the United Kingdom. We have so many Iranians who've had to flee their home country for safety here in the United Kingdom, yet you still see the situation of charities effectively operating as proxies of the terrible regime in Tehran. And I just wonder what further action, the Home Secretary is going to take to clamp down on these organisations that masquerade as charities.
Home Secretary.
Well, on the specific point of charities, of course, the Charity Commission has powers to launch its own inquiries and then force compliance, and they, of course, have a full suite of powers to take action if they think someone has fallen outside of our rules. There is an ongoing Charity Commission investigation into the overall body relating to the IHRC, the trust, rather than the organisation that we are discussing here today. I'm sure the Charity Commission, once they've completed that work, will take appropriate action, and I know that will be the subject of further discussion in this House. Let me assure him we do recognise the desire by some to use our charities legislation and to find gaps in order to pursue other ends that are not charitable and not what the law was intended to do, and we won't hesitate to take further action in this area if we need to.
Madam Deputy Speaker, will the Home Secretary care to explain a contradiction that I see, that she has taken the ban to a peaceful march that has been happening for over four decades, 40 years, citing serious public disorder, whilst the government continues to permit the far right to protest outside hotels housing asylum seekers who call for serious public disorder outside those hotels. And if the Tommy Robinson march, Tommy Robinson, who's also the Home Secretary might like to know, a big fan of hers, the United Kingdom march in September 2025, where violence, in particular against Muslims, was cited, will that be banned as well?
Home Secretary.
Well, let me say to the honourable gentleman that each case has to be dealt with on its own facts. The Unite the Kingdom was a very large march. The police did not seek this power because they assessed, that based on their own risk assessment, that it was possible for that march to take place safely and that they could police it safely, as well as the counter-march that took place, which was smaller in nature. If they had made such a request, I would have obviously had to consider that request based on the full facts disclosed to me in the risk assessment. So he should not conflate multiple different things. There is a very specific risk that is being posed by the march on this occasion, given the international context, and also given that there will actually be 5 marches. There is the main march by those behind the Al-Quds Day rally, and then there are the 4 counter-protesting marches as well. And he must recognise that there is a unique challenge that is posed by 5 marches taking place at the same time in this international context that is different to every other kind of protest and march that has taken place. And I would hope that he does not conflate the two, because I think that that could cause a loss of confidence across our communities. Marches take place every day on a whole range of issues, international and domestic in nature. The police almost never ask for those to be banned. In fact, I've never had such a request made of me, and I think the last time this power was used was something like 2010 or 2012. So it's been many, many years. It is a unique situation given the current context and the unique policing challenge of 5 different marches at the same time. And I would hope that he focuses a little more on the facts rather than the hyperbole that he began his question with initially.
Final question, Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I stand and we stand for an Iran free of the Ayatollah, free of the IRGC, free of a despotic regime that carries terrorism all over the world, free from a regime that killed 35,000 of their own citizens in January of this year. So, with that in mind, can I thank the Home Secretary very much for her decision to ban the Al-Quds march, and it's very important that we take a stand in this House to show that we're supporting those in Iran who are fighting for freedom. In light of repeated concerns for law enforcement and community organisations about the risk of public disorder and clashes with protesters, what further steps will the Home Secretary take to prevent groups promoting extreme ideologies from organising events that would incite intimidation or violence against minorities or other vulnerable groups in the United Kingdom? Thank you very much.
Home Secretary.
Well, look, what I would say to the honourable gentleman is we do have strong laws in this country already on inciting violence and other measures as well. And I would expect the police to always bring the full force of the law upon anybody found to be contravening our laws without fear or favour. And it is important that we do respect and rely on our legal framework, because we do have one of the strongest legal frameworks in the world on all of these matters. The government will always take further action if it's necessary, but I do believe our current framework allows us to strike the right balance between protecting individual freedoms. Even if they're offensive, even if they're provocative, they should still be protected, but as long as they do so within the confines of the law.
That is the end of the statement on protest policing. I'll give the front benches a moment or two to shuffle over. Alex is the third.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to do.
Before the Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister comes to the dispatch box to make the statement, it has been brought to my attention, to the Chair's attention, that possibly information has not been shared in due time. The requirement to provide a copy of a statement to the opposition before it is made, it is set out in the Ministerial Code, Chapter 9, if the Minister wants to refresh himself. I am not responsible for the policing of the Ministerial Code, but it is clearly a discourtesy to the House not to make information available in good time. The Treasury front bench, and no doubt the ministers responsible, will have heard and will ensure this does not happen again. I call the Chief Secretary of the Prime Minister for the statement.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And first, may I apologise to the House if we were a few minutes short of the standard 45 minutes to an hour prior to the statement in publishing the documents, but can confirm they've now been laid to the House and are available on gov.uk. With permission, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to make a statement to update the House on the Government's response to the humble address of the 4th of February. The Government committed to responding to that humble address, and today I can confirm that we are releasing a first tranche of documents which have been laid in the House in advance of this statement and are now published on gov.uk for the public. There are further tranches of documents to come as officials work through the humble address's full scope. Madam Deputy Speaker, it is important to recognise the strength of feeling on all sides of the House, my own included, of the disgust and horror at the nature and extent of the relationship that Peter Mandelson maintained with Jeffrey Epstein, despite his criminal conviction for abusing a vulnerable young girl, including encouraging Jeffrey Epstein to then fight that conviction. Jeffrey Epstein was a despicable criminal who committed the most horrifying and disgusting crimes that destroyed the lives of countless women and girls. What he did is, of course, unforgivable, and his victims, I know, will be in the thoughts and prayers of all members across this House as we debate these issues today. Those victims will always be our first priority, and Peter Mandelson's behaviour was an insult to them and their suffering. And can I say, Madam Deputy Speaker, that I am therefore sorry that these events leave those victims with no choice but to relive their horrors with still too little justice being served. That is why there is, I think, Madam Deputy Speaker, a cross-party consensus in this House for full transparency and accountability, why anybody with knowledge must cooperate with inquiries, whether in the United Kingdom or elsewhere, and why the government is therefore committed to publishing all documents relevant to the humble address. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Prime Minister has taken responsibility for Peter Mandelson's appointment as Ambassador to the United States. He has acknowledged it was a mistake and has apologised, not least for believing Peter Mandelson's lies. As the government has said previously, there are specific documents that this government would like to have been able to disclose today, but which the Metropolitan Police have asked us not to do so yet, in order to avoid prejudicing their ongoing criminal investigation into Peter Mandelson. We have agreed to that request. We will therefore publish these documents in the future as soon as the Metropolitan Police have confirmed it will no longer prejudice their investigation. The government must, as the House already understands, also carefully assess the risk of prejudicing UK national security or international relations posed by the release of any official documents. Any such material will and is being referred to the Intelligence and Security Committee of this House. I thank the committee for their assistance in this matter and can confirm to the House that the committee has agreed with a limited redaction requested by the government in relation to one document that we are publishing today. Outside of this arrangement, this process does not change the important and well-established constitutional principle that national security and international relations judgments are ultimately for the government. Madam Deputy Speaker, on today's release, the documents specifically relate to the decision to appoint Peter Mandelson as Ambassador to the United States and the discussions that subsequently led to his dismissal. These include the Cabinet Office due diligence report, which was passed to number 10 prior to Peter Mandelson's appointment. Information provided to my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, regarding whether full due process was followed during Peter Mandelson's appointment. Papers relating to Peter Mandelson's appointment as His Majesty's Ambassador to the United States, and minutes of meetings relating to the decision to appoint him, and details of the severance payments made to Peter Mandelson after the Prime Minister instructed he be withdrawn as Ambassador, thereby terminating his employment by the civil service. Whilst the documents point to public reports of an ongoing relationship between Peter Mandelson and Jeffrey Epstein, the advice did not expose the depth and extent of their relationship, which only became apparent after the release of further files by Bloomberg and then the United States Department for Justice. After the Prime Minister reviewed the Cabinet Office due diligence that noted public reporting on Peter Mandelson's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, questions were put to Peter Mandelson by advisers in number 10, as Right Honourable and Honourable Members can see referred to on pages 8 and 94 of the bundle, and Peter Mandelson responded. These are matters that are currently the subject of an ongoing police investigation, and we will publish this document when the investigation allows. When we do, the House will be able to see Peter Mandelson's answers for themselves, which the Prime Minister regrets believing. Peter Mandelson should never have been afforded the privilege of representing this country. And I reiterate for the House that the Prime Minister deeply regrets taking him at his word. It was a mistake to do so. I can, however, confirm to the House, as agreed with Madam Deputy Speaker and Mr. Speaker, that we have shared the documents that are with the Metropolitan Police with the Chair of the Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Committee on terms agreed by the Metropolitan Police to ensure as much transparency to this House as is possible. And Madam Deputy Speaker, as soon as the truth became apparent following reporting by Bloomberg, the Prime Minister acted to withdraw Peter Mandelson from his role.
I'm sure that Right Honourable and Honourable members across the House will also read in these documents with interest how Peter Mandelson conducted himself after his withdrawal as ambassador. As the documents show, regarding his severance payment, Peter Mandelson initially requested a sum that was substantially larger than the final payment. Not just 2 or even 3 times, but more than 6 times the final amount, despite the fact that he was withdrawn from Washington because he had lost the confidence of the Prime Minister. The government obviously found that to be inappropriate and unacceptable. The settlement that was agreed was to avoid even higher further costs involving a drawn-out legal claim at the Employment Tribunal, given Peter Mandelson's employment as a civil servant rather than a minister. The House will know that ministers can be dismissed without recourse to the Employment Tribunal. Civil servants are treated differently. The government is committed to complying with the humble address. Further work is ongoing to compile the rest of the information that is in its scope. The government recognises the urgency with which this work must be completed, and the government will of course keep members updated as that work progresses. But we know that these documents also reveal that the due diligence process fell short of what is required. We have already taken steps to address weaknesses in the system and to ensure that when standards of behaviour fall short of the high standards expected, that there will be more serious consequences. We have launched the Ethics and Integrity Commission to promote the highest standards in public life. And we are changing the process for direct ministerial appointments, including politically appointed diplomatic roles, so that where the role requires access to highly classified material, the candidate must have passed national security vetting before such appointments are announced or confirmed. Ministers will now be expected to forego severance payments following a serious breach of the ministerial code, and we have given the independent adviser the power to initiate investigations into ministerial misconduct without the need to seek the Prime Minister's permission first. The Prime Minister has also strengthened the ministerial code with stricter rules on gifts and hospitality, and we have asked the Lords Conduct Committee to review the Code of Conduct to consider what changes are required to ensure that peers can be removed when they've brought the House into disrepute in the other place. We are also exploring whether the committee can tighten rules on lobbying and paid advocacy to bring the Lords in line with the Commons procedures. Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to note that the vast majority of individuals who apply to public service do so with the best of intentions. However, it is right that following the Peter Mandelson case, we ask questions about how we can further strengthen the rules and processes that underpin the operation of government. And we have appointed Baroness Anderson of Stoke-on-Trent in the other House to support this work on standards and constitutional reform as a new minister in the Cabinet Office. I can also announce that the Prime Minister has asked the Ethics and Integrity Commission to conduct a review of the current arrangements relating to financial disclosures for ministers and senior officials, transparency around lobbying and the business appointment rules. And we are conducting a review of the national security vetting system to ensure we learn the lessons from the policy and process weaknesses related to Peter Mandelson's case. Madam Deputy Speaker, let me conclude by reiterating that the whole House will agree that Jeffrey Epstein was a disgusting individual, and Peter Mandelson's decision to put their relationship before his victims and the vulnerable is reprehensible. As the Prime Minister has said, the victims of Epstein have lived with trauma that most of us can barely comprehend. They've had to relive it again and again, and they have had to see accountability delayed and too often denied. We must all learn this hard lesson and end a culture which dismisses women's experiences far, far too often and too easily. Peter Mandelson should never have been appointed, and the government will comply with the humble address. I will update the House further in due course, and Madam Deputy Speaker, I commend the statement to the House.
I call the Shadow Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thank you for your remarks at the outset of this statement. I do thank the Minister for advance sight of the statement that I received at 1:30, but I will note that this whole business is really about transparency. And the fact is that the government has had to be dragged to do this by members of this House, by members on both sides of this House, and so to produce a 135-page document and put it online 23 minutes before this debate is really not acceptable at all. And I do respect the Chief Secretary coming and doing this himself, but it really ought to be the Prime Minister sitting there, because all of this is about the Prime Minister's judgment. And so it's very convenient that this document was published after Prime Minister's questions today, when the man who made the decision, the man whose judgment is in question, could have been put under scrutiny by honourable members. Exactly. There are very many questions that arise from the documents published right now. I will put a few on record and then I will return to the central theme. There is the issuance of severance pay, which the Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister referred to. Why did ministers agree to any severance pay, given what had happened? I think a lot of our constituents will be disgusted that Peter Mandelson received £70,000. Will Peter Mandelson's full declaration of interests that he is supposed to have handed over when he was appointed be published? I don't believe that they are included in the tranche today. Is this because of a police request, or is it for some other reason? Will the Chief Secretary publish a register of withheld and delayed documents so that the House can be aware of what is being held back? And will he give us a little more information, either now or in the future, on redactions? It is important that this House understands who is deciding on what will be redacted. This awful saga involving Jeffrey Epstein continues. I understand that as this House meets, one of his ranches in New Mexico is being investigated because there are reports that bodies are buried there. At the centre of this scandal was a very rich and powerful man who despicably abused his position, and he was helped to become rich and powerful by his associates. One of those associates was Peter Mandelson. So while, of course, I associate myself with the remarks made by the Chief Secretary about Epstein's victims, it's very clear that those victims were not in the Prime Minister's mind when he appointed Peter Mandelson. The Prime Minister has already admitted that he knew Mandelson had maintained his friendship with Epstein even after the latter's conviction for his terrible crimes. That was a bad choice, and it's a choice that we can now read about in black and white, Madam Deputy Speaker, on page 11, where the Prime Minister was told after Epstein was first convicted of procuring an underage girl in 2008, their relationship continued across 2009 to 2011, beginning when Lord Mandelson was business minister and continuing after the end of the Labour government. Mandelson reportedly stayed in Epstein's house while he was in jail in 2009. Now, the Prime Minister claims that he was lied to. He wasn't lied to by this due diligence document. And it may be that Mandelson denied these claims. And if so, maybe the Prime Minister was lied to. But he was lied to by an inveterate liar who had been fired twice before. And we're supposed to believe, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the Prime Minister, who was once the chief prosecutor in this country, couldn't see through this nonsense. It beggars belief. Over the coming hours and days, we'll see whether these documents reveal why the Prime Minister's judgment failed so badly. But we must suspect that it was because his then Chief of Staff was Mandelson's protégé. And Morgan McSweeney had set up Labour Together, the Prime Minister's private campaigning organisation, and Peter Mandelson had advised Morgan McSweeney on the establishment of that organisation, and that organisation had been responsible for breaking electoral law so that it could hide the sources of its funders from the public and from the Labour Party. And then Labour Together had sought to intimidate and smear journalists who revealed that wrongdoing, and it provided hundreds of Labour MPs and many of the top brass in the Cabinet with free money and free services. This, Madam Deputy Speaker, was the ultimate job for the boys. The Prime Minister knew all he needed to know. It was on him. It's on him now. He let his party down, he let his country down, and I very much doubt that either will trust him again.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Shadow Chancellor of the Duchy asked me a number of questions, which I will take in turn. The first was on severance payment. He asked me, Madam Deputy Speaker, why that payment had been made and who approved it. As I set out in my opening statement, Peter Mandelson was employed as a civil servant, not as a minister. That meant that on his summary dismissal by the Prime Minister, he had the right to take a claim to the Employment Tribunal. As you can see in the documents, Peter Mandelson asked for a much larger sum with the implied threat that that would be taken through legal proceedings with associated legal costs. The government, wouldn't have wanted to pay £1 to Peter Mandelson. But in contrast to the cost to the taxpayer of employment tribunal legal fees and maybe a payment that in the advice would have been higher than the amount that was given, the government reluctantly agreed to that award. The Prime Minister has since said that Peter Mandelson should either return that money or donate it. On the question of who approved the severance payment, the House will see from the documents that the request from the Foreign Office was made to the Treasury. The payment was approved in line with Treasury business rules, albeit reluctantly, and with an express condition that a non-disclosure agreement was not allowed in these circumstances. And for the sake of completeness, there is reference in the bundle to that business case requiring my approval, and I can confirm to the House I did not receive that request or indeed approve it. The Shadow Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster asked me then about some of the documents, namely about redactions and a register of withheld documents. On the question of a register of withheld documents, with permission, Madam Deputy Speaker, I would need to take that away to take advice from lawyers in the Metropolitan Police to be able to say whether these documents are being held for their criminal investigation or not. I hope that the House is somewhat reassured by the mechanism we have been able to establish with the chair of the Select Committee, who has sight of these documents, albeit in a contained and controlled way. Redactions in the documents that are made by government are only to protect the names and contact details for junior civil servants, as is due practice. Other redactions that relate to international security and international relations are done with the approval of the Intelligence and Select Committee. He lastly asked me about the report from the Cabinet Office to the Prime Minister. As I've said in my opening statement, the Prime Minister did ask subsequent questions of Peter Mandelson following that report being submitted by the Cabinet Office. These questions were undertaken by his advisers in number 10, and whilst this is a document that we can't publish at this time, the Prime Minister is very clear that he regrets having believed the lies that Peter Mandelson put before him.
Rachel Maskell.
Madam Deputy Speaker, clearly Peter Mandelson's associations bring a real stench to the appointment processes, but I want to know about the business associations and the way that they are scrutinised within the process, because clearly we know that Peter Mandelson's PR company, Global Counsel, had strong associations, a client in fact, Palantir, who has won lucrative contracts from successive governments. I want to understand if the papers demonstrate those associations and the associations that Peter Mandelson then brought into government.
My honourable friend will see from the documents being published today that those commercial interests were raised by the Cabinet Office and established processes were put in place where new members of the civil service have to remove those commercial interests before taking office. And there is some commentary in the bundle about the conversation with Peter Mandelson in advance of his appointment as Ambassador to the United States, specifically about that question. Having said all of that, part of the review that we are now taking forward is another look at the business appointment rules to make sure that the processes that were applied in these circumstances are robust enough in the situation in which we're discussing. And if we need to further strengthen them, we stand ready to do so.
The Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the Chief Secretary for advance sight of his statement. It is a stain on our nation that we're even having to go through this. It's right that we keep Epstein's victims, survivors and families at the front of our minds. Today, Madam Deputy Speaker, marks the first day of Britain's own Epstein files. And for a close friend of Epstein to have been made Britain's ambassador to the United States is a shameful part of this affair that is the Prime Minister's responsibility. It is disappointing that he is not here now to answer for that and his catastrophic failure of judgment with respect to Mandelson. Peter Mandelson's close relationship with Jeffrey Epstein and the fact that it continued long after Epstein's conviction for child sex trafficking have been reported by both Channel 4 dispatches in 2019 and the Financial Times in 2023. Has the Prime Minister told the Chief Secretary personally how those reports made him feel and why he still felt it was right to appoint Mandelson anyway? Mandelson's £70,000 payout is an insult to Epstein's victims, and if he had a shred of decency left, he would donate it to charity. But the Chief Secretary's explanation as to why the government made that payout simply won't wash. Madam Deputy Speaker, with a very limited number of documents being released today, the wait goes on for the rest of Britain's Epstein files. That includes the documents related to Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, required by the humble address our party passed a fortnight ago. I very much hope the government will get them out as quickly as possible. It has taken 5 weeks from the Mandelson humble address to publication today. So can the Chief Secretary guarantee that the first Andrew papers will be published within the same time frame by the 31st of March at the latest?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As I've said to the House, the Prime Minister regrets having appointed Peter Mandelson as Ambassador to the United States. It was the wrong decision. He has apologised for it. On the question of severance, as I say, the government would not have wanted to give £1 to Peter Mandelson, but it was the quickest way to remove Peter Mandelson as Ambassador and a member of the civil service. And as the leader of the Liberal Democrats says, and the government agrees with him, the honourable thing to do would be to donate that money to an appropriate charity. On the question of the humble address, the one that was brought forward by the Liberal Democrats is being managed by the Department for Business and Trade. I know they're working on that now and will come forward with updates in due course. And as I said in my statement, the Cabinet Office will come back with a further tranche of documents in relation to this humble address as soon as possible.
Justin Matters.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. If one of my constituents came to see me and told me that they'd lost their job or been sacked because they had lied during the application process and wanted compensation, I would tell them that they had absolutely no chance of doing that. So I really struggle to understand why we paid a penny. I understand what the Chief Secretary has said about not wanting to do that, but really the risk of an employment tribunal claim in these circumstances is minuscule. And he's absolutely right. That money should have been paid to a victims' charity. So will he now press Mandelson to do the right thing and give that money to the victims of abuse?
I thank my honourable friend for his question. He and the House will see from the bundle of documents today that the government acted on the basis of legal advice in awarding that settlement payment. But I agree with him wholeheartedly and repeat from the dispatch box that the honourable thing for Peter Mandelson to do was to donate it to an appropriate charity.
Committee Chair Simon Hoare.
Deputy Speaker, and I acknowledge what the Chief Secretary has said with regards to my role as the Chair of the Committee looking at documents sort of pro tem on behalf of the House, and that will be done, as he knows, properly. Now, just following on the point that the Honourable Gentleman has just raised, the Chief Secretary is of course right that under the civil service rules, Mandelson could have made a claim to a tribunal. He's right on that. But the Honourable Gentleman is also right. Anybody who has secured a position by deception would find themselves standing on the thinnest of thin ice with no chance at all. And the approach that Mandelson has shown in the original claim that he made just underscores the shamelessness of the individual in question. So my direct question to the Chief Secretary is this. On the point that, because he's admitted that the Prime Minister was lied to, that is a deception, was legal advice sought as to the likely outcome of any employment tribunal case brought by Mandelson? If it was, what that advice was, and if it wasn't, why not?
The advice, Madam Deputy Speaker, is in the bundles that have been published today. The honourable gentleman has to forgive me for not being able to refer him precisely to the right page at this moment, but they are in the documents today. And whilst it is not for me to defend the claim that Peter Mandelson was making against the government, I would just say to the House that one of the issues would, of course, be the legal fees in actually defending that claim at the Employment Tribunal itself a cost to the taxpayer, even if in the end the government would have been successful. And it was those considerations that were put to the government in advice, which is why that settlement figure, which was a much lower figure than the legal fees and potential settlement being asked for, was the case.
Lewis.
And some of the points were very relevant. But this isn't just about technicalities, about lapses of judgment. This is about a wider, rotten political culture, a 30-year project where proximity to wealth and power isn't a means to an end, it is the end goal. That's what Peter Mandelson represented, and he wasn't just about him being the ambassador or selected to be ambassador. He was at the heart of the political project around number 10. That has to change. Does the government understand? Out there, this isn't just about one bad set of decisions. It's about a political culture that he represents and that is destroying party politics, mainstream party politics in this country. Do we get that? Do we understand that? Will we change?
My honourable friend and I are members of the Labour movement because we share the same values. We're here to represent the voices of working people and those that have no power and no access across this country. That is what our movement was created to do, and we share that ambition. But do I recognise that we are still operating in a system where power and wealth can lead to these types of outcomes? Absolutely. Do we have a shared ambition of tackling that? Yes, we do.
Dr. Kira Mullen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Minister will know that at the moment the Government is putting through a bill about the duty of accountability and candour. One of his ministerial colleagues sat just down from him will confirm that it requires ministers to answer questions with candour. 3 members of this House asked the Minister what the payoff was for Mandelson several weeks ago, and he refused to answer. So I'd asked him to reflect on whether he acted with candour. And coming back to this question of whether he deserved a payout, isn't actually the truth that the government knows this tissue, this story, this suggestion that they were lied to and there's no possible way they could have found out the truth would be torn apart in an employment tribunal, and that's why he didn't want to go into it.
Yeah, good point.
That was not the rationale, and the documents will speak for themselves.
Rachel Blake.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This statement has truly been sickening. Does the Chief Secretary agree with me that the sickening behaviour and conduct of Mandelson is in part a symptom of structural misogyny? And will he use his office to drive out structural misogyny from Whitehall and Westminster?
My honourable friend is right to raise the bigger issues that are in question around the process of appointment and disclosure and deceit and the rules that are in place. Above and beyond all of that, unfortunately, is a country and a world in which the voices of women who are subject to male violence and the abuse of power and privilege is still rampant. And all of us, I think in any party, in any part of this House, would want to suggest that that is not the way in which we wish the world to operate, and we should all do what we can to change that. That's why this government is committed to issues around halving violence against women and girls. That's why we talk about how we tackle structural misogyny, whether it's at the heart of our political system or in business or elsewhere. And I know that my honourable friend and I share those ambitions, and will do all that we can to make that a reality.
Stephen Flynn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. If I listened to the Minister correctly, which I think I did, he said that his victims must be our first priority. Let's be clear, for the Prime Minister, they were not. Because on the 11th of the 12th, 2024, he received advice which says, and I state, Epstein was first convicted of procuring an underage girl in 2008. The following sentence says, Mandelson stayed in Epstein's house in June 2009. I repeat, the victims were not the Prime Minister's first priority. So that being the case, how can the Minister, with a straight face, stand at that dispatch box and say we must learn this hard lesson and end a culture which dismisses women's experiences, when it was the Prime Minister who chose to ignore those experiences, ignore those facts, and appoint Peter Mandelson in the first place?
The honourable member will have heard from my, forgive me, the right honourable member will have heard from my statement that in response to the reported allegations that are listed in the Cabinet Office due diligence. These were, of course, at the time, allegations. Questions were put to Peter Mandelson by Number 10 advisers. His responses to those questions are part of documents that we are not yet able to publish, but that we would have liked to have been able to publish today. Since then, the Prime Minister has made it very clear that Peter Mandelson lied to him. He regrets believing those lies, and if the depth and extent of that relationship, which nobody in this House understood until the Bloomberg publication of documents and the US Department of Justice disclosures, he would never have appointed him in the first place.
Steve Witherden.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The release of documents outlining what was known about Mandelson's association with Epstein is welcome. Mandelson's avarice, his business connections and his malign influence within the Labour Party are simultaneously why he was made ambassador and why he was useful to Epstein. Does my right honourable friend agree that we should be seeking to distance ourselves from flawed democracies that are drifting towards authoritarianism, such as the United States, rather than using those associated with sex offenders in order to strengthen such relationships?
My honourable friend will know from the statements of the Prime Minister and the documents being published today that he regrets having ever appointed Peter Mandelson as ambassador to the United States, and that in our country we rightly respect the rules that are in place that need to be observed, that there must be clear consequences for people who breach them, and as I've said in earlier answers, that even in our country we have much further to go to tackle violence against women and girls and structural misogyny, and that we should all have a shared ambition for tackling that as quickly as possible.
Sir Julian Lewis.
The Chief Secretary deserves our admiration for always being calm and courteous, even in the most trying circumstances, but he really mustn't take us for fools.
Oh, yes.
Peter Mandelson had a reputation as one of the most slippery and sleazy characters in modern British politics. The Chief Secretary confirms that the Prime Minister was warned about what Mandelson had done in continuing a relationship with Epstein after he had been sent to jail for abusing a young girl. He is saying that, well, the Prime Minister didn't know the depth of this relationship. Is he really expecting us to believe that a shallow relationship with a convicted paedophile is okay?
I would just say to the Right Honourable Gentleman that at the time of the appointment, there were public comments from Peter Mandelson, I think in a Financial Times interview, where he had said that his relationship had ended much earlier than documents now show was to be the case. On the back of the Cabinet Office reports about those newspaper stories, the Prime Minister had further questions put to Peter Mandelson, documents for which we will be able to publish in due course, and that's why the Prime Minister says that he regrets having believed Peter Mandelson's lies and wished he'd never appointed him in the first place.
Byrne.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The appointment of Lord Mandelson was not just a catastrophic error of judgment that has caused profound damage to this government's reputation. It was the result of a clique at the top of the party, as we have seen with the Morgan McSweeney and Labour Together scandal, for which I and colleagues on these benches have called for the Prime Minister and General Secretary of the Labour Party to launch an independent investigation into. So can the Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister outline what structural safeguards are being implemented today to ensure that cronyism never again overrides the national interest in high-level appointments?
Well said. I refer my honourable friend to the list of changes that the government is undertaking from my statement earlier, from the work of the Ethics and Integrity Commission to a review of the business appointment rules, to looking at the role of lobbying and transparency to make sure there are consequences for the few people who do seek to breach those rules. And together, alongside with the Duty of Candour Bill, which has been mentioned in the debate so far, this will be the widest range of changes to our ethics and standards framework in many, many years, if not a generation. I will just reiterate, as I did in my statement, that the vast majority of public servants serve the public for the right reasons and adhere to the rules. But evidently, when there are those that seek to evade them, we need to ensure that we're more effective at catching that in the future.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I find this faux outrage about Mandelson really astonishing. He was a man that was closely involved with the current Prime Minister, the leadership of the Labour Party, ever since Tony Blair, and very closely since 2020. They must have known his character. They must have known what he was like. In the documents that the government is now producing, will we know every piece of advice that was given to the Prime Minister by his officials and by the Foreign Office, and specifically, will there be a record of any verbal briefings given to the Prime Minister before he made this calamitous decision to send Mandelson to Washington? I think the public need to know why the Prime Minister, despite all the knowledge about Mandelson, felt the need to go ahead with this appointment.
To answer the right honourable gentleman's question, the tranche of documents today that relate to the appointment and then the dismissal of Peter Mandelson as ambassador are inclusive of all of the documents held by government, bar those which have been held back by the Metropolitan Police for their criminal investigation. There are no other further documents that have not been published.
John Slinger.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Prime Minister rightly called for the removal of peerages from disgraced peers. So can the Chief Secretary set out to the House when we might have an update about the proposed legislation in that regard?
Can I thank my honourable friend for the question? As the House knows from previous statements on this issue, we want to ensure that where people break the rules, there are consequences for that behaviour. One of the areas where this was not the case was the appointment of life peerages in the other place, where there were no provisions for taking a peerage from somebody in any circumstance, which has been a problem in the past in relation to criminal convictions and other disreputable behaviour. It's right, therefore, that the government is working with the other place to bring forward legislation to give the authority and powers for that to happen in the future, and will be coming forward with those proposals in due course.
Smith.
Mr. Speaker, two Global Council clients benefited from direct government defence awards. There were Global Council staff flying to Washington parties to join Peter Mandelson. Could the Minister confirm that either in this bundle or in future documents there will be a rigorous view and report to Parliament of the background to those awards and to all of the parties? There'll be guest lists for those parties, just so that Parliament can see what happened and how we improve things and make sure that never happens again.
I can confirm that all other documents that are in the scope of the Humble Address that are not being published today will be subject to the Metropolitan Police and clearance from the Intelligence and Security Committee, published in the next tranche.
Richard Bergen.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I hold in my hand the advice that was given to the Prime Minister before he made the decision to appoint Peter Mandelson as ambassador to the USA. Reading this advice document, it's clear that the Prime Minister wouldn't have given the go-ahead for this individual, Peter Mandelson, to stand as a Labour candidate for Town Council, but instead he was elevated, despite what's in the document, despite what was known, to this most important of positions. There's a whole section entitled Relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. The question that has to be asked is, how did it even get to the stage where the Prime Minister was interviewing Mandelson for this job and considering him for this job? The simple answer is political. It's because it suited the interests of a tiny faction in the Labour Party, funded by big business, who wanted Mandelson at the heart of things in order to shift a Labour government away from the agenda that a real Labour government should have. That's why Mandelson was popular with these people. That's why he was one of their favoured sons. And that's why, despite his despicable character, despite his greed and his avarice, he was put in this position despite what was known. Isn't that the case?
It's not for me, Madam Deputy Speaker, to speak on behalf of Peter Mandelson, but evidently he put himself forward for this role, which is how he ended up in the process in the first place. To the question of his appointment, as I've said to the House, the Prime Minister regrets his appointment and apologises for it. And had he known what the House now knows, he would never have appointed him in the first place.
Much, Madam Deputy Speaker. In his remarks, the Chief Secretary mentions policy and process weaknesses in our political system, and he's right to do so, but surely the real failure is one of the Prime Minister's judgment. He also talks about the depth of Mandelson's relationship with Epstein not being known, but Mandelson's character was, and it was known for a long time. There was a long-standing interview exercise when somebody was applying to be a press officer for the Liberal Democrats. Peter Mandelson has resigned in disgrace again. Draft the press release. It is difficult to legislate out poor judgment, but the Chief Secretary has talked about legislating for policy and process weaknesses. When does he plan to bring forward this legislation?
There are a number of changes that can be made without legislation, and I'll be able to update the House on that in due course. That will, of course, be quicker to implement as a consequence of it not requiring statute. Where we specifically need statutory changes, which I think at this stage will predominantly relate to the removal of peerages from those in the other place that bring their House into disrepute. As I say, we'll bring that forward in the coming months.
Arthur.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I do thank the Minister for his statement and also for the tone in which he's brought it here today. I think it's been quite an open statement in terms of the discussion. But I think as a government we're serious about the whole agenda of violence against women and girls, and I just cannot conclude that giving Mandelson £75,000 is compatible with that. So I do hope that he repays it. And I think constituents in Edinburgh South West are really concerned about Epstein's links in the British establishment, really concerned. And so, particularly given the allegations against both Mountbatten Windsor and also Mandelson himself. And I know there's a live court case and investigations underway, but can the government commit to a public inquiry into Epstein's links into the British state once these court cases are over?
My honourable friend will know that there's an ongoing criminal investigation in this country, and of course there's investigations happening in the United States, in Congress and elsewhere. As the Prime Minister has said, anybody that has any relationship or had any relationship with Jeffrey Epstein or any connection to the events or organisations that he hosted should be readily putting themselves forward to answer any questions and try to help bring justice to the victims who have been waiting for too long.
When will the government release Mandelson's declaration of interest, and why is it not included in the documents released today?
All the documents that are available in relation to Peter Mandelson's appointment and dismissal are published in the tranche today, subject to those which have been held back by the Metropolitan Police. All further documents that relate to the humble address will be released in the second tranche, which will be in the coming weeks.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Chief Secretary rightly referred to a wider set of reforms on openness, accountability and transparency that will now be considered, and I do welcome Baroness Anderson's appointment to support that work. Can he assure me that lobbying reform writ large will be in scope of the Ethics and Integrity Commission review, and that will include looking at previous PACAC reports, including the PACAC recommendations on the Greensill David Cameron lobbying scandal that still haven't been responded to? And does he also agree that the antidote to the distrust that we've seen in politics can be better public participation? So I do want to acknowledge the launch of the Citizen Assembly yesterday, and I personally believe that more citizen assemblies is the way to put power closer to the people and away from power and wealth in this country.
Can I thank my honourable friend for his question and also pay tribute to him for his years of work on this issue. I can confirm that the wide-ranging set of reviews that are taking place today will happily receive submissions from him and others in this place and the other place, should they wish to make them, and we'll be looking at current and previous reports from the relevant committees in the normal way.
Thank you. On the 11th of December 2024, just 9 days before the Prime Minister confirmed Mandelson as the new ambassador, these papers show that he was specifically advised of the JP Morgan report from 2009, which expressly said that Mandelson, after Epstein's conviction for soliciting prostitution of a minor, quote, maintained a particularly close relationship with Epstein after that. Yet the Prime Minister, a former chief prosecutor, chose in those circumstances, with that information, to believe the lies of Mandelson. How could that be? And given that it is, what does it say about the judgment of our Prime Minister?
The Prime Minister has said that he regrets believing the lies of Peter Mandelson, and had he known the depth and extent of the relationship that we now all know and have confirmed, he would never have appointed him in the first place. That's why the Prime Minister has apologised and acknowledged that his appointment was a mistake.
Moon.
Whereas, Madam Deputy Speaker, Epstein was a truly despicable criminal, and Mandelson's lying and actions with Epstein shamed the nation. But does the Chief Secretary agree with me that what we must not do right now is to compromise criminal investigations that the Met are currently undertaking? Because to do so would be to fail the victims of Epstein and their families. But can the Chief Secretary also reassure the House that as and when documents do come available, they are published in a timely manner?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. The victims of Jeffrey Epstein have, for too long, had justice delayed or denied, and the very worst that we could do is to undermine a criminal investigation that may at last bring some justice to the horrors that they had suffered. That's why the government is working closely with the Metropolitan Police to make sure that we do everything we can to not prejudice that investigation. It is why there are some documents, even though we might like to publish them, that we've chosen not to do so at the request of the Metropolitan Police. But I am grateful to the Metropolitan Police for agreeing to allow us to put those documents before the chair of the relevant select committee, so that in some way on behalf of the House there can be independent verification that we are not misusing that process in any way to withhold any documents when we are completely committed to full transparency.
Chris Law.
Madam Deputy Speaker, like all statements, it's not just what's in but what's left out. We learned today that the due diligence, which has not been spoken about in any detail in the statement, provided to Prime Minister Keir Starmer before Peter Mandelson's appointment as a US ambassador, warned in it will quote, a general reputational risk. So it's not just him sitting down having a chat with Mandelson and not believing him. He was warned it was a general reputational risk. So my question to the Minister is very simple. Which failing does he think the Prime Minister suffers from? Ignorance, arrogance, or both?
The Prime Minister has apologised for appointing Peter Mandelson as the ambassador to the United States. He believed the lies that Peter Mandelson put to him in response to questions about his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. And as soon as all of us, including the Prime Minister, became aware that those were indeed lies, with the publication of documents from Bloomberg and the United States Department of Justice, he was dismissed promptly.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In my investigations into Palantir, it's been brought to my attention that 20 years ago, Peter Mandelson was lobbying the government very hard to take on board a strategic supplier from the States that was not an obvious choice at the time. That sort of decision is something that a financier like Epstein would have made advantage of and made money from. We see the same things with influence and persuasion from Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor. Will the government commit to following the money and following the money trail to see that we are not continuing to pay into Epstein's estate through the deals that we are doing with large American contractors such as Palantir?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm not familiar with the details of the case the honourable gentleman raises, but if he wishes to write to me with those details, I can commit to him that we will look at them.
Question, Stephen Gethin.
Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Minister has said that he wants to be open with us. Now, I've put down a series of parliamentary questions about when Peter Mandelson ceased employment at the Foreign Office, and I never got a response. They were first tabled on the 4th of February. Now, there's a flurry of emails on the 4th of February without any context to them at all. Will he provide the context? Is it a coincidence? Why couldn't the Minister answer my question previously? And if he does want to be open, then let's try another one. He said that Peter Mandelson was fired because he told lies. In that case, he's been given a £75,000 payoff. £35,000 of that was a special severance payment. £30,000 of that was tax-free. Why on earth was it tax-free?
Madam Deputy Speaker, in relation to the tax-free treatment for payments following dismissal without recourse to the Employment Tribunal, those are the tax rules that exist in all circumstances in this country. The government did not have the legal powers to override them. On his question about parliamentary questions, I think the documents he's hoping to see are being published today, and they, of course, speak for themselves.
That is the end of the statement on Lord Mandelson humble address motion. Update. Point of order, Gregory Stafford.
On a point of order, Madam Deputy Speaker, during Cabinet Office questions on the 5th of March, the Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister informed me that the appointment of the new Director General of the Propriety and Ethics Team was made on an interim basis and in line with the rules. However, I have now received a copy of the Civil Service Recruitment Framework, which states that a temporary promotion, managed move, or the appointment of a single applicant within the senior civil service must require ministerial authorisation either from the Prime Minister or the relevant minister before an appointment can be made without an external competition. Given the importance of the transparency and confidence in this government's propriety and ethics system, could you please advise the House, Madam Deputy Speaker, on how members can seek clarification when there appears to be a discrepancy between a minister's statement to the House and the provisions set out in the Civil Service Recruitment Framework 2022.
I thank the honourable member for his point of order. He will know that I and the Chair are not responsible for the answers given by ministers. But the Minister, as I can see, the Chief Secretary is already here. I think he wishes to respond. Go ahead, Chief Secretary.
I'm happy to do so, Madam Deputy Speaker. I do not recognise the discrepancy. As I've said to the House previously, there was a temporary appointment to the role in question within the rules. Permanent appointment to that role will be subject to the normal recruitment processes. But if he wishes to write to me with more detail, I'll happily respond to him in writing.
Hopefully that enables the member. Otherwise, he can obviously pursue this even further. Point of order, Liz Saville-Roberts.
Has the Speaker received any notice of a statement from the Government following the question from my honourable friend, the member of Arbroath and Broughty Ferry, to the Prime Minister this morning regarding the contents of a memo from the Prime Minister to Cabinet members advising them to disregard opposition from devolved governments to direct interventions by Westminster ministers? Could she advise me how the long-standing Sewell Convention, which enshrines the protocol that Westminster governments do not intervene in devolved matters in Wales, Scotland or Northern Ireland, has been respected in this matter? And could you direct me to which bin this has been filed by the government?
I thank the honourable member for giving notice of her point of order. I have received no such indication from the government, but I can see that the Chief Secretary wishes to respond in person once again.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The issues raised in the Cabinet note that's been, I understand, leaked to journalists are important, and the government takes them seriously. The Sewell Convention is an important framework for the role in which the UK government respects the devolved responsibilities of devolved governments, one for which I am the responsible minister, which is why I have repeated engagement with the First and Deputy First Ministers of the devolved government about our relationship working together. However, I will just remind the House that devolved governments are important, but in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland there are two governments, the UK government and the devolved government, and that's why we retain the right to deliver for the people of Northern Ireland, Wales and Scotland, as well as in England.
Point of order, Stephen Gethins.
Point of order, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I firstly apologise to you that I've not been able to give you notice of this, but this is in reference to the response and to the documents. I put down a written parliamentary question about when Peter Mandelson left his employment on the 4th of February. The emails on the 4th of February show that officials knew the answer to that question the 16th of October. Yet not only was my question late when it came back and I had to put down a second question, but no answer was forthcoming. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, we have a role here and a job